Mick was a bitter and sad old man. He had been through many tough patches in his life, more than any one person should have to bear. His wife and daughter had passed away in a car accident. To cope with the loss, he had turned to drink and substance abuse. Despite eventually getting clean again, he had also lost his job and even been forced to move from a lovely big family home in the city to a small and rustic cabin deep in the woods. Times were certainly tough. His friends had abandoned him and he had no other family to really speak of. It was clear to anyone and everyone that Mick was a lonely man. Not that he would ever admit it though. He was strong and proud. But during those long dark nights in the woods by a silent lake, even he had to admit his loneliness. So he just lived alone in his cabin, far away from the outside world. He worked as a freelance writer for various companies and would only venture into the city when he needed to go shopping for food and supplies. It was a lonesome life to live, but he had exiled himself and tried to tell himself that he enjoyed this life. But what Mick didn't know was how much life was going to change in an unexpected way. One day, as Mick was sat working at his laptop, he heard a soft but repeated tapping noise. It made him jump as there was usually nothing but silence. Turning around, he looked around the cabin. There didn't seem to be anything out of place, so he returned to his work, blaming it on the soft breeze outside. But suddenly, the tapping started again, louder this time and more deliberate. He stood up and started wandering around, trying to locate the source of the sound. But when he found out what it was, he couldn't believe his eyes. He moved softly around the room, listening for the tapping noise, until it dawned on him that it was coming from the door. Creeping over to the wooden entrance, he pulled the handle and opened the door to find no one was there. Strange. Just as he was about to close the door though, something caught his eye and he looked down and nearly let out a yelp of surprise. An otter was sat looking at him. It looked like an older animal, as its fur was peppered with silvery gray hairs. It tapped on the doorframe again before looking down to its feet to reveal a small, perfectly round pebble. It picked it up and placed it just inside the door at Mick's feet, as if offering it as a gift. Mick smiled and went to the kitchen, returning with a small piece of fruit. The otter took it and happily munched on it before slowly wandering back down toward the lake and away. Mick thought it was a strange encounter, but he shrugged it off as a one-time only event. But over the course of the next few days, the old otter returned over and over, always bringing a pebble before having a small meal and finally leaving. It was a fun and cute little relationship Mick and the tiny animal were forming. Mick was a grizzled and downbeat man, but even he started to look forward to seeing his little friend each and every day. From that point onward, every morning Mick would wake up to find a new special stone on his porch and to hear the little otter tapping against the door to get his attention. And every morning Mick would feed it some food. It might be bread, it might be cereal, it might be fruit, or even leftovers from the night before. The otter didn't mind. Its favorite was tuna though, as it wolfed down the tasty treat in no time on the occasions that Mick would offer him it. Mick was so tickled by his new and unexpected friend that he took several photos and videos and submitted them to the local news website. They always liked local stories, and it was a bonus when wildlife was involved. Mick even received a phone call from a reporter asking about the otter and questioning Mick about his little visitor. The story made quite the fun little splash in such a sleepy part of the world. The day after the story was published, he even found people were reaching out to him to ask about the otter. Sometimes they had questions, sometimes they just wanted to thank him for looking after the wildlife. And more often than not, a few more photos of the little old otter were always appreciated. Mick wasn't used to this level of interest in him and his life, but much to his surprise, he quite enjoyed it. Over the next few months, he would split his time between working at his computer and enjoying his time feeding his new little otter friend and interacting with fans of the little old animal. He even started mailing out special hand-picked pebbles from the otter himself. It was a fun way of interacting with people. Overall, Mick's life certainly had taken an interesting and wholly unexpected twist. He wasn't complaining though. He really did enjoy the company that the otter was providing. One morning, Mick woke up and went to make his coffee like normal. He looked out of the window that overlooked the lake and smiled. excited to see the little otter come bounding up the bank and towards his cabin, before tapping his hands against the door. But he saw no sight nor sound of the little otter. Mick thought it to be pretty strange, but didn't think too much of it. He always came at some point. But hours passed, and still the otter hadn't shown up. Days went by and there was no sign of the otter, no footprints, and no little special pebbles left as a gift. Mick had even put out a tin of tuna for his little friend, but it remained untouched and unopened, save for the occasional bird flying down and pecking a few pieces away. So eventually, Mick decided that he was going to venture out and take a walk around the lake to see if he could spot his little friend. Out he went, and after hours of strolling, he still had no idea where the cute little otter was. But as he started to walk back up the banking towards his house, he noticed a small shape at the far corner of the building next to the drain pipe. Walking over to the shape, Mick's heart sunk. There was the otter, laid still and looking peaceful. His salt and pepper coat was bone dry, which told him that the poor animal had been there for several days. The poor little animal had clearly passed away, but it's what the otter was holding in his hand that made Mick choke up and his eyes fill with tears. The otter was holding a pebble that was uniquely shaped. Usually all of the pebbles were rounded or perhaps a little jagged, but this one was special. This one was shaped like a love heart. The otter was bringing it to Mick's door when he passed away and was still gripping onto it. Mick gave his small friend the burial that he deserved. He dug it a hole and laid it to rest just next to the porch of his house, overlooking the still lake where the otter lived. And to mark the special spot, Mick placed all the stones he had collected from the otter in a neat and commemorative pile at the head of the grave. The story does have a happy ending though. Because of the news story, many people had become fans of the otter, but also Mick had surprisingly become good friends with a lot of those people too. He would start to make the journey out of the forest and into the city to see them, and even invited them to his cabin on many occasions, even visiting the otter's grave. Mick found his day starting to get filled up and his life start to get happier and more full of love, and he was more grateful for this turn in fortunes than he could possibly say. And it was all thanks to the one little old otter that decided to keep a lonely old man company. What did you think of this incredibly moving story? Which animal would you like to keep you company all day long? And how would you have felt if you were in Mick's lonely shoes? We always love to hear from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below.